When I was maybe 10 years old, I started scribbling in the corners of my notebook. They started off as black and white and simple. They would start in the left corner near the metal spiral and extend to the right and down along the solid red margin. I convinced my mom to give me a multicolored pen. You know, the kind with the sliders at the end to let you choose a primary color to write with based on which color you press down. That's when things got even wilder on my notebook pages, where my doodles used to split like the Red Sea and avoid the area where my notes would be. I started letting them take over. I stopped pretending to take notes or pay attention. Instead, I let my mind wander between the curves and designs I was pressing into the pages. When I say pressing, I mean it too. I'd have to skip a few pages into the notebook to get past the ghostly impression of the design I'd finished before starting something new. I eventually got creative and started using a thin paper-sized cardboard. I'd put that behind the page I was working on to keep my designs from imprinting onto the other pages. The teacher would call on me often, asking me to answer a question he knew I wasn't paying attention to. I would usually shrug, looking up at him innocently, quickly flipping the page so he wouldn't see what I was actually working on. He didn't care enough to investigate or badger me any further. He'd get distracted and move on, and I'd find my way back to the wild world of my little masterpieces. I know I said this started when I was 10 years old, but the more I think about it, the more I realized it went further back than that. I was an only child to a single mom. Now that I'm older, I realize how difficult that was to deal with. She couldn't afford for us to live in a house, so we would stay in an apartment for a while until the landlord raised the rent, and we'd find ourselves packing and living out of cardboard boxes in the new downgrade we moved to. As a kid, I didn't mind that because I could draw all over the towers of cardboard boxes. They were my canvases. I kept myself busy with that while my mom spent hours on the phone trying to find a babysitter who would work for little to nothing, or calling to complain about an overcharge that we couldn't just shrug off like most people could. Once the boxes were unpacked and our stuff was put away in the new place, the boxes were broken down and stuffed in the guest closet. I'd have to find new canvases for my drawings. A few times, I remember my mom in tears, trying to reason with me after she found marking doodles all over the white walls of the apartment. She was carrying the world on her shoulders, and she couldn't handle anything else. Since it wasn't our own house, she stressed about the deposit and what the landlord would think. This was yet another thing she would have to spend hours cleaning, and there was no Mr. Clean magic eraser back then. The stress would all bubble up and she would collapse into a ball on the carpet and sob. I didn't understand. I was too young to understand, so I would break down into my own crying session along with her. I'm sure that didn't help the situation, but that's how we made it through. I know I caused her a lot of trouble, looking back at all of it now, but it was nothing compared to what I found myself dealing with later. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. I wasn't excelling in school by any stretch of the imagination, for so many obvious reasons. I was so preoccupied with drawing, obsessed you could call it. I would stay up late into the night because I would suddenly get the need to draw out some design that was bouncing around in my head. I would sometimes draw them on my palm if I didn't have access to paper, like when I would take the public bus home. The other riders would look at me, I'm sure, so I poured my entire focus into my palm. Sometimes I'd be so absorbed in that, I would forget to tug the rope to let the driver know I wanted to be dropped off at the next stop. So, I'd get off at the following one and walk back to make it look intentional. On those walks home, depending on when I finally paid attention to pull the rope and how far the bus driver dropped me off from my actual stop, I would walk by some interesting neighborhoods and places. My mom told me to make sure to keep my head down and not respond back if someone called out to me. There were always people out, sitting on the front step, some laughing, some smoking cigarettes, some arguing on the phone. I usually shoved my hands into my pockets and walked quickly by. On this particular day, I saw an older man carrying a large basket full of colorful tubes. He was struggling to keep the door open to his shop. My mom taught me manners above all else, so I instinctually ran over and grabbed the door to hold it open for him. He smiled down at me with the gentlest smile and walked backwards through the doorway to maneuver the basket through without scratching the door frame. It was a pretty big basket. I watched him as he made his way over to a table nearby and set the basket down. He turned back around to meet my stare and said, "Ah, thank you, boy." "You're welcome," I chimed back enthusiastically. "Come on inside. Let me see if I can find you something to show my gratitude," he said as he quickly turned around to the shelves behind him and shuffled through some rectangular woven baskets. It didn't look organized at all, but he seemed to have a pretty good idea of where things were. I wearily stepped inside of the place and let the door close behind me. I kept my palms pressed on the glass of the door, just in case I needed to make a quick escape. I looked around the dimly lit room. There were drawings all over the walls, each in small squares, and a few chairs that looked like ones I'd seen at the dentist, with spotlights pointing down on them. I turned my attention back to the man fumbling through the shelves. He held up a sheet of paper between his middle and index fingers and said, "Here it is." He grabbed a pair of scissors and hurried over to me. My heart sank and I pressed my body closer to the door. He dangled the paper in front of my face and said, "Which of these do you like best?" I squinted my eyes to see what he was talking about. On the sheet of paper were small squares separated by dotted lines. Each square had a colorful drawing inside of it. The drawings were beautiful. To avoid an awkward moment, I made a quick decision and pointed at one of the squares that had an abstract design with vibrant blue swirls accented by bright yellow dots. He nodded and smiled as he started cutting out the square I'd selected. He motioned for me to follow him over to a sink nearby. There was a small plastic piece that was sitting on top of the drawing that he removed and then placed the drawing on the back of my hand. I winced, thinking it would hurt for some reason. He grabbed a towel and ran water over it, and then placed the towel on the back of the paper. I felt the warm water drops slide down my arm as he held it there for a few seconds. My heart was racing. I had no idea what was going on, but I hoped it wasn't anything that was going to get me in trouble with my mom. After a few seconds, he removed the towel and the paper, and, like magic, the drawing that was once on the paper was now painted onto the back of my hand. I couldn't believe it. It was like the doodles I drew on my palm, but so much better. I passed my finger over the drawing, and it didn't rub off. Wait, did he just give me a tattoo? I'd heard about those before from my mom, and she said I was never allowed to get one, that it hurt when applied and it couldn't be removed easily. My heart raced uncontrollably. This man was so nice. There's no way he would do something like that to a kid. "There you go. I hope you like it. Now run off home and be safe out there," he said and waved me away. I tried to keep my cool, thanked him, and waved goodbye as I threw myself toward the door. I rushed outside and walked quickly home. On the back of my hand of all places, she'll definitely see it. There's no way I could hide that from her. She, of course, spotted it right away as soon as I walked through the doors. She let my face turn beet red and waited as I stuttered over what happened and how sorry I was. She was holding back a smile the whole time, and then she finally let out a chuckle. I was shocked. She wrapped me in her arms and told me it was okay. She explained what a temporary tattoo was and how she was proud of me for holding the door open for someone. She told me she wanted me to be more careful and not to go inside of strangers' homes or shops unless I had her permission to beforehand. And then she did the thing she always did. She pressed her fingers together to form an upside-down water drop, and she gently pressed it on the top of my head and said,
"May the raindrops wash away your worry, and the wind teach you how to hurry. We'll find a better place than here, to hide away from what we fear."
I would fumble it along with her. I didn't understand why she said it, and it sounded weird to me. But at the same time, it was comforting because she always said it in the most comforting ways, and I always felt safe. I was relieved she wasn't mad and that this tattoo was temporary. I was mesmerized by it because it was similar to the doodles I enjoyed making, but this was even cooler because it could be transferred to the skin. My mind ran wild and I wanted to learn what that man did. I started to miss my bus stop on purpose so that I had to walk by his shop. A lot of the glass was covered with paper, but I found a small spot where I could press my face into the glass and see one of the chairs with a spotlight. People would go in and lay back in the chair, and the man would use a device on their skin. It looked like he was doing surgery. Then they'd usually stand up and adore the area in the mirror. Beyond the red bruising, I could make out colorful drawings on their skin. On a particular Thursday morning, I hurried off the bus and toward my special spot to peer in through the opening between the papers on the window. As I pressed against the glass, trying to catch a glimpse of something, I felt a warm grip on my shoulder. I held my breath and slowly turned around. My nervous eyes met the smiling eyes of the man who owned the shop. He asked me what I was doing, and I explained my curiosity. I grabbed my notebook from my book bag and showed him my designs. His eyes lit up with enthusiasm as he paged through my little creations. I felt noticed for the first time, accepted. He genuinely liked what I had drawn. He asked if I wanted to see what he did, and I sprung up from where I was sitting as if I'd been pinched in the back. I followed him into his shop, and he pulled up a stool for me beside one of the chairs with the spotlight pointed down on it. As if by design, someone walked in and greeted the man. He asked him about his pricing and what designs he had available. He walked her around the gallery of square papers taped on his walls. Then he made a special stop at my notebook and had her flip through my designs. She nodded as she looked at each page. I watched her flip between two designs that she seemed to be torn between. She talked it over with the man, and then he turned to me and asked if I could combine them for her. I felt like this could only be a dream. I must be laying in my uncomfortable cement-like bed, letting my imagination wander to a place I would much rather spend my time. I took the notebook from her hands and started doodling, referencing both designs as I interlocked them. She watched in awe as it came together. I handed the notebook back and she responded with a positive nod and handed the new design to the man. He smiled and had her sit as he started his work, and I watched. It was incredible. The needles, the colorful ink, and the way he used the tools to press colors into her skin. It was absolutely magical in my eyes. Before I left that day, he shook my hand and told me his name was Raymond. The many trips I made past his shop after that, he always greeted me at the door and asked if I wanted to watch, and I joyfully accepted every time. I spent the next several years following the same routine. Going into high school was an adjustment and, of course, a new school, but I found a way to still visit the shop on my way home. By then, I was helping Raymond, organizing the space, greeting people as they came in, walking them around to the different designs as he finished up his current client. I told my mom I had an after-school club that needed me to stay a bit later. As I got to be more comfortable, Raymond took me to the storage room in the back of the shop where he kept his ink, needles, rolls of paper towels, spray bottles, disposable razors, skin markers, and boxes of latex gloves. This is also where he kept his sterilization equipment. As he showed me around the storage room, I made sure to tell him that I was willing to help clean and sterilize too. He seemed happy with my offer and said he wouldn't mind that at all. He glazed over the back left corner of the storage room and quickly moved on. But being the curious teenager that I was, I looked closely and saw a pile of 4 wooden crates stacked on top of each other with a blue X drawn on the side of each one. I pointed them out and asked what they were for. Raymond looked nervous for a moment and then told me not to worry about them. He'd been meaning to throw them out but hadn't gotten around to it. It was just some old ink, but he needed to sort through them before throwing them all out. I told him I'd be happy to help with that task, but he snapped back quickly, that familiar smile leaving his face, and he said through clenched teeth, "I said, don't worry about those, boy." I hadn't realized that I was being overly helpful in the wrong situation, so I let it go and followed after him. He quickly finished up the tour and let me out of the storage room. The next day, the crates were gone, and I assumed he took care of taking them out to the dumpster himself. Senior graduation came and went, and I barely got my diploma. My mom was hounding me about college, but I had my eyes set on something bigger and better, something I'd been training for since I was 10. Raymond had mentioned several times that he would be honored if I wanted to take the shop over, and I was excited to work alongside him. In the days following numerous graduation parties, I had to adjust my usual bus ride to school so that my route was headed directly to the tattoo shop instead. Oddly, several of my attempts to visit Raymond were met with a closed sign at the door. I kept trying, peeking through the windows with each visit to see if I could spot him. One of those days, I was walking back into my mom's house after another unsuccessful visit to the tattoo shop. The phone rang, and I answered it. It was a man claiming to be Raymond's executor. He talked about estates and wills. He told me that Raymond had passed away naturally in his sleep and had named me in his will. He started rattling off a bunch of legal jargon as I sat there taking in the upsetting news. I shouldn't have gotten so attached, but in my little world, Raymond played the part of a dad that my real dad didn't. And there I was again, having someone tell me that another father figure had stepped out of my life. I went quiet, deep in thought. All of the memories I'd had with Raymond, all of the things I dreamt up for us in the future. This man on the phone was carelessly dismissing them, trying to just check some boxes off and move on, while my world was collapsing around me. "Jeremy, do you accept?" the executor said, interrupting my solemn thoughts. "I'm really sorry," I said, pausing to figure out what to say next. "What am I accepting?" "Raymond will be transferring his tattoo shop over to you. Do you accept?" he repeated. Another shocking announcement delivered. The emotions were all over the place, and I was thrilled, but that feeling was being swallowed by the gaping hole in my heart. I wanted to get off the phone so badly, so I managed to say, "Sure, that's fine." After a string of more legalities, I was able to hang up and work through my thoughts. The days to follow included signing mountains of paperwork. Once the dust settled, the shop was officially mine. I was relieved to have something that kept Raymond around in my life. Every client that came by had a Raymond story, and it made me feel like he was still with me. I knew the business inside and out, and I started creating pretty elaborate designs for clients, which was attracting a lot of new people. My mom was nervous about me owning a tattoo shop and was pretty hesitant about even visiting at first, but she came around. I was in a big haze those first several weeks, torn between the loss of Raymond and the excitement of getting to carry on his legacy in this little area. Simple things slipped my mind, especially since I was only 18 and didn't really know how to run a business all by myself. I learned quickly that a lot of traffic means you'll be running out of ink faster too, which means you should be keeping an eye on your inventory and making sure you're fully stocked. At the end of each day, which was usually around 8 p.m., I was so exhausted. I would just clean up, sterilize, lock up, and head home. The next day, I would sleep in as much as I could and head into the shop around noon to start the day up again. The day I realized I had neglected to get more ink was luckily a light day. I had one client who walked in. He wanted a pretty complex design, high up on his bicep. It wasn't until after I got him prepped and ready that I found myself frantically digging around for ink. I ran to the storage room and there was nothing there. I moved some boxes around and there they were, the crates with the blue X drawn on the side of each one. I thought Raymond had thrown them away, but he must have just hid them away. Relief rushed over me as I grabbed a tube from the top crate. There weren't any typical labels on these tubes, just a small sticker with an expiration date marked for the end of the current year. Again, a huge sense of relief came over me, with the added bonus that the ink hadn't expired yet. I squeezed a bit of the ink onto the edge of the top crate just to make sure it was flowing okay, and it came out just fine. I grabbed the colors I needed and went back to the chair where my client was waiting. I started my work and was amazed at the quality of the ink. The colors were incredibly vibrant. They brought the design to life. The client was very impressed and tipped generously on his way out. I was glad, too, because no one else showed up for the rest of the day. With the lack of traffic, I decided to take the opportunity to run out and correct my mistake by restocking on more ink. I threw a "We'll be back soon" sign on the door and headed out. On my way back, I couldn't stop thinking about how amazing that ink looked and wondered why Raymond was talking about throwing it out, but then why he hid it instead. Maybe it cost him a lot to buy it and that it was okay to use, but maybe he didn't feel comfortable using it until he figured out how much he should charge for it. Nothing against Raymond, but I had a way with the business aspect of the shop and decided to give it a try. I created a more costly pricing tier and labeled it Special Ink. A few who could afford it jumped on the chance to have a tattoo that was unlike others they'd seen. I will admit, not many people used it, but enough did for me to make quite a profit. I even managed to purchase a used car to make my commute much easier. I didn't have to keep taking the bus anymore. A month into introducing the special ink offer, I was cleaning the storage room and noticed something had bored through the wood of the top crate that held the special ink. It was in the same spot where I had squeezed some of the ink to try it out. My bigger concern was an animal or termites. I continued cleaning to make sure I didn't see any mouse droppings or insect infestations. As I cleaned, I heard,
"Hello?"
I knew that voice. I rushed out of the storage room to see my mom standing there. I smiled and ran over to give her a hug. It had been a while since she'd visited. She told me she'd been hearing really great things about the shop and was interested in getting something herself. I was thrilled. She asked about the special ink and said she might as well go big if she was going to do this. I, of course, didn't charge her. She just wanted something small on her wrist. I pulled out the special ink and started working away after she chose her design. I finished pretty quickly and she was thrilled. There's something exceptionally rewarding when your parent acknowledges your passion, especially when it's as subjective as the art of tattooing. I was very amateur with my point of sales process. I would just fill out a receipt from a receipt booklet and keep the carbon copy. My mom insisted I fill out one for her so that her name would be stored in my receipt history for us to look back on later. I filled it all out with the date and everything, including special ink in the for field, like I did for others who chose that offer. I put $0 for the amount and tore her copy off and handed it to her. She folded it up, put it in her purse, gave me a hug, and headed home. It was such a great feeling. I had a small waiting area where I'd put a TV. I clicked that on for some background noise. It turned on directly to the news, where there was a man being placed into a body bag, leaving behind a pool of blood. I had intended on turning the TV on and walked away to keep cleaning, but this caught my attention. The newscaster reappeared and showed the picture of the man in the upper right corner. Wait a minute, I thought. That man looked familiar. He was the first person I had tattooed with the special ink. What happened to him? I felt so bad because I'd crossed paths with him, and his death looked gruesome. They must have shown more details on how he died before I turned the TV on, but I wasn't ready for that type of rundown. The day went on, and some clients came through, so I kept busy. The next day, I turned the TV on as soon as I opened the shop and let it run in the background. A few hours in, a loud breaking news alert echoed through the empty shop. I rushed over and the newscaster appeared, revealing yet another body being placed into a body bag from a pool of blood. This was so bizarre. 2 in a row? This time, I made it in time to get those details I'd missed before. Just like the one from the day before, she was found in her bed, blood soaking across the entire comforter and mattress. They said investigators found a large gaping hole in her arm where the flesh had gone completely missing. There were no traces of the missing skin on the bed or anywhere around her. It was as if it melted away. If that were the case, she bled to death and must have not woken up while it was happening. There were no signs that anyone entered her home or any sign of struggle. They suspect she died in her sleep from the bleeding, but were dumbfounded by how that could have happened. The newscaster came back on the screen, and again, there was a face reveal. I found myself right where I was the day before, shocked that it was a client I'd had the day after the first guy. Probably a bizarre coincidence that they passed away in the same order they visited my shop. What bothered me was when they described the hole in her arm, and the location of that hole was a little too close to where I remember tattooing her. I didn't catch the details of the guy before her, but deciding to shake off that eerie feeling and go about my business. A few days went by and I kept the TV running in the background. No breaking news. I visited my mom that weekend. She had prepared a big lunch for us to enjoy together. She showed me the tattoo on her wrist right away, proudly waving it around. I smiled, but was also disappointed at how much it had faded. Those vibrant colors weren't so vibrant anymore. I asked if she noticed, and she made the comment that only an artist would be so critical of his own work. Throughout the day, I noticed her gripping her wrist uncomfortably from time to time. I asked her about it, and she said her wrist ached a bit, but it was probably from aging and using the computer. I told her to let me know if it continued aching so I could take her to the doctor to get it checked. I knew she hated the doctor, but it had to be done, and I was the only kid she had to watch over her. I went back to my routine at the shop, but on Tuesday, the breaking news popped up again. I was just getting ready to start a tattooing when I excused myself and watched the TV intently. Another bloodied bed, another body bag, another gaping hole. I felt the blood leave my face completely as I saw the picture in the upper right corner appear. Another one of my clients. I had given her a special ink tattoo a week after the last one. Was this connected to the ink? Again, the gaping hole was in the spot where I tattooed and was the size of the tattoo she'd gotten. My head was spinning. I must have done about 10 of those special tattoo sessions. Just as I was thinking that, the newscaster announced that the investigators found a receipt on her nightstand for a tattoo she'd gotten exactly a month ago. She went on to say that investigators have reason to believe that there is a connection due to some ink they found on the victim's body around the hole. They are planning to revisit the other bodies and see if they find a similar pattern. I tried to calmly walk back to the client I had waiting in his chair. I finished up his tattoo and turned the sign on my door over to closed. I couldn't focus. I went back to the crates in the storage room. That hole on the side of the crate came back into view. Does this ink have some weird chemical that breaks things down? I dumped all the ink from all 4 crates into a trash bag. A piece of paper floated out of one of the crates and onto the floor. It had handwritten words scribbled on it, so I quickly folded it up and stuffed it in my pocket to deal with later. I took the trash bag of ink and walked quite a distance away from my shop until I found a dumpster in one of the alleys. I dropped the bag into the dumpster and headed back. As I approached, I saw 2 officers pull up in front of my shop, and they instantly looked in my direction. They asked if they could come in and talk for a little bit. Since I'd gotten rid of the ink myself, I felt comfortable letting them in. They, of course, asked for samples of the ink I was actively using, and I shared that with them without issue. Then, they noticed my stack of receipt booklets and asked if they could look through them. That's when I realized I made a mistake. They saw the names and the dates and noticed a pattern where I had used the words special ink on the receipts of the individuals they'd found dead so far. They asked what that meant, and I fumbled through my answer. I mentioned to the officers that it just represented the additional care I put into the tattooing service, and that my mom's name could be found in the receipt book with that service, and she had no issues. They asked for her number, and I happily provided it. They thanked me and drove away as I let out a sigh of relief. I headed home, trying to collect my thoughts. I was stuck in that miserable feeling again of multiple emotions. I was deeply grieving for the numerous people who lost their lives because of my mistake. I was scared to death of the idea that I was behind it all and that the police suspected me. And I was terrified about losing the only family I had left, my mom. I went into my room and felt the stiff edges of that piece of paper in my pocket. I pulled it out and started reading through it. It was some sort of instructional document outlining how to properly use the ink that was in those crates. It specified the fact that the ink took 2 months to work through the skin to lead to undetected bleeding, with a person's heart rate dropping at night while they were sleeping. It pointed out that the user knew it was working if the ink faded over time. The fading indicated that the ink was making its way past the layers of skin toward the muscle and bone. My heart raced as I went through each line on the page. At the very bottom, in small letters, it read, "Curse reversal. That which makes the first use of this ink must be destroyed. I didn't believe in any magic or curses or any weird voodoo like that, but this lined up too closely with what was happening as a result of using this ink. Reality set in, and my heart beat louder in my ears. Every day I lived was every day my mom got closer to that slow, nightly death that all the other victims suffered. But it was a double-edged sword, wasn't it? If I risked my own life to save my mom's, I had no way of confirming that her situation actually got reversed and she lived happily ever after, because I'd be gone. There was the potential that she'd still be in the same dilemma, counting down the days until that dreadful night. I sat there brainstorming. What if I make sure I'm at the house on the day it's supposed to happen, to make sure I wake her up and get her emergency help to stop the bleeding? That made sense to me, and that was the plan I set my mind to. As I waited for the days to count down, I decided to start emptying out my shop in the middle of the night, slowly. I started in the back storage room and noticed those crates that carried that ink I wish I'd never seen. The memories of Raymond and all the client visits flooded back, and tears swelled up in my eyes. I felt like I was slowly losing everything after feeling like I'd had it all for a while. As the emotions took over, I kicked the crates in anger, and they toppled over. The crate on top slammed down on the ground, and I noticed a spark fly off of it. I remembered that hole that had been boring into the side of that crate, where I tested some of the ink. It felt like the ink that still lingered on it was alive somehow, but I realized that was all in my head. Still, I decided to start a little fire out back and permanently get rid of all those bad memories once and for all. The crates were a perfect starting point. I lined all 4 of them up to form a square and shoved some twigs inside of them that I'd gathered from some trees nearby. The fire burned almost loudly as it turned the light brown wood into dark ash. I kept throwing things in as it burned to get rid of as much as I could. After a few hours, I decided to head home. Raymond had kept a gun in the shop that I grabbed on my way out. As I walked out the front door of the shop to lock up, I saw blue and red lights off in the distance. My body went into an immediate panic. I couldn't keep playing with fate anymore. Everything and everyone was after me at this point. As was my life, nothing seemed to ever go as planned, and I found myself quickly abandoning the plan I'd put together only a few days ago. I got into my car and started driving as the sirens got closer and louder. I pulled out the gun I'd grabbed from the shop and laid it in the passenger seat. I stared out at the road as I noticed drops of rain splashing onto the windshield. I whispered to myself, "May the raindrops wash away your worry, and the wind teach you how to hurry. We'll find a better place than here, to hide away from what we fear." My hands shaking, I got my cell phone out of my pocket and dialed my mom's number. It rang once and went straight to voicemail, and I choked up getting ready to tell her everything. I wanted her to be on the other side of the line so badly, but she wasn't. "Mom, it's me. I'm the reason your arm hurts. I'm the reason all of those people died that you saw on TV. I feel sick about it all. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, and I wish I could stop it, rewind it all and make better decisions, but I can't. Something terrible is going to happen to you if I don't put an end to my life now. If the police catch me and lock me up, I won't have the chance to end it like I do now, and you'll bleed out one of these days all alone, and there won't be anything I could do about it. I'm so sorry, Mom, but I have to do this to spare you from that misery, and all I can do is hope that it works. I wanted to call and say goodbye. I wish I could have talked to you directly, but this is the best I can do. Bye, Mom." I hung up and parked the car on the side of the road, gripping the gun in my hand as I prepared for that dreadful moment. I saw the lights approaching quickly behind me. I heard the officers outside asking me to step out of the car. I threw my door open as I felt my phone vibrate. I looked at it and noticed that it was my mom calling me back. I stuck my hand out, gesturing for the officers to give me a moment, forgetting that I was holding the gun in that same hand as I walked toward them, trying to answer her call in the midst of the chaos around me. My hands were shaking and I missed the button to answer, so I went to voicemail. I heard the officers yell for me to put my weapon down, and all I could do was audibly say, in a whisper, "Please wait, please," as I tried to open the voicemail that appeared on my phone. Just as I pressed my thumb onto the play button, I felt the eerie piercing of a bullet dig into my chest, sending my phone into the grass beside me and my body flying onto the pavement beside me. I felt raindrops fall heavier on my face as everything around me became blurry, and the sounds that were once loud became muffled. I heard my mom's panicking voice fill the void between my heart pounding in my ears and the police sirens in the air as her voicemail played.
"Jeremy, where are you? What's going on? I just listened to your voicemail and I don't understand what you're talking about. I'm fine, sweetheart. Whatever pain I had in my wrist, it went away earlier today, and I was calling to let you know. But it seems like maybe you were calling me at the same time. Please answer. I'm sorry I missed your call, but everything's okay and none of this was your fault. Please, Jeremy, call me back as soon as you get this.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Until next time, stay spooked.